Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack the real story behind the founding of America, moving past the simple myths to see what really happened. You know this story, right? It's the one most of us learn in school. A group of plucky English folks in funny hats, seeking religious freedom and creating a perfect new world. It's a simple, inspiring tale. So let's dive into this, because the real history, it's way more complex, a lot messier, and honestly, so much more interesting than the version we usually get. To get to the truth, our story doesn't start in Massachusetts with the Pilgrims. Nope. It actually begins 13 years earlier, down in Virginia, with a very different group of people who were looking for one thing: to get rich. Look, this was not a religious mission. It was a business venture, plain and simple. Jamestown was founded by the Virginia Company, which was basically a corporation, and their investors back in London were expecting a serious return. They were hoping to find gold, just like the Spanish had in South America. But that dream of easy riches, it crashed head-on into a brutal reality. First, there was no gold, and the colonists themselves, a lot of them were so-called gentlemen who had no interest in farming. Captain John Smith famously wrote that they would rather starve than work the land. And starve they did. I mean, the early years were an absolute catastrophe. After this one gruesome winter they called the starving time, only 65 settlers were still alive. With a one-year survival rate of just 20%, you can imagine how hard it was to convince new people to make that trip. So, to populate the colony, the company turned to the system of indentured servitude. The deal was, in exchange for your passage to America, you signed away your freedom for 7 to 10 years. You were, for all intents and purposes, a temporary slave who could be bought and sold. This system became the absolute backbone of Virginia's labor force. So what saved this failing colony? Tobacco. This stuff became Virginia's gold. Production absolutely skyrocketed, and it completely shaped the society. It led to these huge, isolated plantations, not little towns. It created a society that was overwhelmingly male and fiercely focused on individual profit. And then, ominously, just 12 years in, the first African slaves arrived in 1619 to work those fields. So this profit-driven model sets the stage for a completely different vision for America. Because while the Chesapeake colonies were built on this raw pursuit of gold, a second English experiment was taking shape up north, one built on the pursuit of God. Okay, this is the part of the story we're all a bit more familiar with, right? The Puritans and Pilgrims in Massachusetts. But their mission had its own set of complications and contradictions. So these settlers were Puritans. They basically believed the Church of England hadn't gone far enough in its Protestant reforms. The Pilgrims were an even more radical group who wanted to just separate from the church entirely. And here's a fun fact. They were actually headed for Virginia, but they got blown off course and landed in Massachusetts. Before they even got off the boat, they signed the Mayflower Compact, agreeing to a form of self-government. And this quote right here, this brilliantly illustrates their guiding principle. The leader of the much larger Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, he laid out their mission to create a perfect, godly society that would serve as a model for all of humanity, a city upon a hill. But, and this is a big but, this vision had its limits. It wasn't a democracy. Only full male church members could vote. They saw social inequality as just part of God's plan. And it was deeply intolerant. If you disagreed with the church leaders, like Roger Williams or Anne Hutchinson did, you were banished, kicked out. And yes, there was slavery here too. So when we look at these earliest colonies, we don't see one American origin story. We see two completely different blueprints for what America could be, established just a few hundred miles apart. And the differences were just stark. In Virginia, it was all about individual profit, big plantations, and a government for landowners. In Massachusetts, it was about a collective religious mission, small farms, and a government run by the church. Two totally different worlds.
So, what should you take away from all this? Well, it's that America's origin story isn't one simple, heroic narrative. It was messy and contradictory right from the very start.
The country wasn't founded on a single ideal. Instead, it was founded on this deep, lasting tension between two powerful motivations: the individual pursuit of wealth and the collective pursuit of a righteous community, profit versus piety. And that question, born from the conflict between Jamestown and Massachusetts Bay, is something Americans are still grappling with today. Which of these two founding impulses truly defines the nation? The individual pursuit of wealth or the collective mission to be a city on a hill? That's a question worth thinking about.